The courtroom smelled of whiskey and dust. The wood floors creaked under the boots of ranchers who had come in for the spectacle, not the justice. Outside, the cicadas screamed against the late summer heat, but inside, silence hung thick. Silence broken only by the judge's drawl as he leaned back in his chair, hat tilted low, eyes sharp as barbed wire. "Pick any wife you like," he mocked, lips curling, "and see if you can make a man out of yourself." Laughter rippled through the gallery. It was not kind laughter. It was jagged, cruel, the sort that carved wounds no bullet could match. Cole stood stiff, his jaw tight. He wasn't a boy, though they wanted to make him feel like one. He was 30, broad-shouldered from years of ranch work, but grief had left hollows beneath his eyes, and grief made men easy targets. On the bench beside him sat the women, 4 of them, widows all, their bonnets shadowing faces the town had already dismissed. The youngest, no more than 20, kept her hands folded tight, eyes darting like a trapped bird's. The oldest stared at the floor, jaw set hard with a bitterness earned over decades. But it was the one in the middle, the one the judge made certain to gesture toward, who drew the cruelest sneers. Thea. She was heavy-set, her black Amish dress loose and plain, her white bonnet stark against her flushed face. Her husband had died the winter before, and with no children to anchor her, she was a woman unmoored in a land that prized usefulness above all else. The rancher's son snickered, whispering about her size, about her quiet, about her plainness. Cole's hand flexed at his side. He knew he should walk out, leave the farce behind. But leaving would mean surrender, to the judge, to the town, to the grief that had dogged him since his brother's grave went cold. The judge's eyes narrowed. "Well, Cole, what'll it be?" That was the moment. The one the town would talk about for months, maybe years. The one they'd use to measure whether Cole was man or coward. His throat was dry, but when the words came, they landed like iron. "I'll take the widow." The laughter stopped. Not all at once, but in jagged gasps, as if the room had forgotten how to breathe. Thea lifted her head for the first time, her eyes wide beneath her bonnet. For a moment, just a moment, something fierce flickered there, something more than shame, more than disbelief. But let's go back, because moments like that don't spring from nowhere. They're built from years of silence, from broken nights and aching mornings, from choices no one remembers until they land like thunder. Cole's ranch lay 7 miles north of town, on the edge of a stretch of prairie so wide it made a man feel small. His cabin stood weather-beaten, its porch slats warped from rain and sun, the barn leaning as though tired of standing. His cattle grazed thin, their hides dulled from a summer that had burned the grass to brittle straw. He lived alone now. His brother, Amos, had been the talker, the easy laugh, the one neighbors liked. A fever had taken him sudden, and in the silence that followed, Cole found himself unable to fill the void. Men didn't visit his ranch much anymore. They nodded from their saddles when they passed, but their eyes slid away, as if grief were catching. Cole's nights were long. He would sit on the porch, listening to the coyotes sing in the distance, his hands idle on his knees. Sometimes he would dream of Amos's voice calling from the barn, and he would wake with his heart racing, only to find the world still dark, still empty. It was in this silence that the summons came. The marshal himself had ridden out, dust streaking his coat. "The judge wants every man fit to marry in that courthouse come Friday," he said. "Too many widows without homes. Town can't carry 'em." Cole had frowned. "And if I don't show?" The marshal's mouth twitched. "Then you'll answer for it." So he'd gone. And now, standing in the heat of that courtroom, with every eye fixed on him, he realized the town had been waiting for him to falter, to bow his head, to choose the easy path, to laugh with them. But Cole wasn't laughing. Thea's hands trembled in her lap. She had not spoken a word all morning. He remembered glimpsing her once before, in town, last spring. She'd stood outside the mercantile, a sack of flour hugged against her chest, while 2 boys on the corner whispered and nudged each other. She'd kept her eyes down, but Cole had seen the way her knuckles whitened against the sack, how she swallowed hard before walking on. Now, in the stillness of the courthouse, he saw the same steel in her again. Beneath the shame, beneath the mockery, there was something the town hadn't noticed, or hadn't wanted to. When the gavel cracked against wood, the spell broke. The judge leaned forward, squinting as if to make sure he'd heard right. "The Amish widow." His voice carried disbelief. "You'd choose her." Cole didn't flinch. "I said what I said." A murmur rose from the benches. Some shook their heads. Some chuckled low, as if this was the greatest joke yet. But others, wives mostly, stayed silent, their eyes following Thea with something like recognition, like a quiet prayer that she might stand under the weight of what had just been placed on her. Outside, the wind kicked dust across the street, rattling a loose shutter against the saloon. The sound echoed faintly through the courthouse walls, as if the town itself were holding its breath. Cole glanced at Thea once more. She met his gaze for half a heartbeat, then lowered her eyes again. But in that brief glance, something passed between them, not love, not yet, not even understanding. Just the shared knowledge of what it meant to be set apart, to be pointed at, to be made smaller than you were. And in that knowing, the story began. Thea didn't speak on the ride back from town. She sat in the wagon, hands folded in her lap, her bonnet tipped forward to shield her face. Cole guided the mules down the dusty trail, the reins loose in his calloused hands. The creak of wood and the steady clop of hooves filled the silence. Every so often he glanced at her. She hadn't protested, hadn't asked what sort of man he was, hadn't even looked at him when the vows were spoken in that cramped courthouse. She had simply stood, quiet as stone, and let the town laugh. Cole's jaw tightened as the courthouse echoes replayed in his head. The sneers, the whispers, the judge's mocking drawl. A choice meant to humiliate them both had turned into something he hadn't planned. He wasn't sure what he'd expected, but the weight of it pressed heavy on his shoulders as the prairie stretched wide around them. By the time the ranch came into view, dusk had settled low, painting the sky in streaks of copper and violet. The cabin stood small against the horizon, the barn leaning, the pasture fence in need of repair. To Cole it was home. To her, it must have looked like exile. He pulled the wagon to a halt. "Not much, but it'll do," he said, his voice rougher than he meant. Thea finally lifted her head, her gaze sweeping over the cabin, the barn, the wide fields. She said nothing, only gathered her skirts and stepped down, moving with surprising grace for her size. Her shoes sank into the dust, and she stood there a moment, breathing in the stillness, her face unreadable. Inside, the cabin was plain, a table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed shoved against the far wall, and a small hearth blackened from use. Cole caught her glance at the single bed and felt heat creep up the back of his neck. "I'll sleep in the barn," he muttered. "You take the bed." She looked at him, then really looked, her gray eyes sharp beneath the bonnet. For a moment, Cole thought she might speak. Instead, she gave a small nod and set her satchel on the table. That night, Cole lay on a pile of hay in the barn, staring up at the rafters. The cattle shifted in their stalls, lowing softly. He thought of Amos, of how his brother would have laughed at the day's events, how he would have said, "Cole, you got yourself into it now." But beneath the heaviness, there was something else. Not relief, not exactly. More like the first breath after being underwater too long. The next morning, the ranch stirred awake with the pale light of dawn. Cole saddled his horse, ready to ride the fence line, when he caught sight of Thea through the cabin window. She was already working, a pot simmering on the hearth, her sleeves rolled up, flour dusting her hands. The smell of baking bread drifted out the open door, mingling with the cool morning air. Cole paused, the reins loose in his grip. No woman had baked bread in that cabin since his mother had passed, years before. Something in the sight, ordinary as it was, stirred a hollowness in him he hadn't expected. By noon, word had already spread. He rode into town for supplies, and the stairs followed him like shadows. Men leaned against posts, their smirks unhidden. Women glanced and whispered, their eyes sliding away quickly. At the mercantile, Tom Ellsworth, a rancher with more cattle than kindness, blocked his way near the sacks of grain. "Heard you took the widow," Tom said, his grin wide. "Hell, Cole, you always did have strange taste." A few others chuckled, waiting to see how Cole would respond. Cole kept his voice even. "I didn't ask your opinion." Tom tilted his head, the grin fading. "You don't need to. Whole town's got one already." The words hung heavy, daring him to react. Cole's hand itched, but he only shouldered past, hefting the grain onto his back. The laughter followed him out the door. Back at the ranch, Thea was tending to the wash, her skirts tucked neatly, her sleeves damp from wringing cloth. She looked up when he rode in, her eyes flicking over the supplies without a word. Cole set them down by the door, feeling the day's sting still raw beneath his skin. He studied her as she worked. There was a steadiness to her movements, a quiet discipline. She did not ask what the town had said, did not flinch from his silence. For the first time, he wondered if she had been living with the weight of mockery far longer than he had. That evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Cole sat on the porch, a cup of coffee cooling in his hand. Thea joined him, settling into the other chair. The cicadas sang, the cattle lowed in the distance, and for a long time, neither spoke. Finally, Thea's voice, low and even, broke the silence. "You didn't have to choose me." Cole glanced at her. The words weren't bitter, not sharp. They were simply true. "I know," he said. Her gaze stayed on the horizon. "Then why?" The questions settled heavy between them. He thought of the courthouse, the sneers, the judge's smirk. He thought of Amos, of the empty nights, of the weight of being alone. "They wanted me to laugh," Cole said at last. "I didn't feel like laughing." For the first time, she turned fully toward him. Her eyes were steady, searching. Then, slowly, her lips pressed into the faintest shape of a smile. Not joy, not yet, but something softer than the silence that had lingered between them. It was the first crack in the wall. But walls don't come down easy. 2 nights later, trouble found its way to the ranch. Cole had just finished shutting the barn door when he heard it, hoofbeats, faint but steady, approaching through the dusk. He straightened, his hand tightening on the lantern handle. Riders at this hour meant one of 2 things, trouble or worse. Thea stepped out of the cabin, her face pale, in the lantern light. "Who is it?" Cole scanned the ridge, the figures still too far to make out. The hoofbeats grew louder, rolling like thunder across the prairie. He swallowed hard. "We're about to find out." The riders came slow, not in a rush, not in the mad gallop of outlaws or raiders. That almost made it worse. Cole stood in the yard, lantern in one hand, the other resting lightly near the butt of his holstered Colt. Thea stayed back near the porch, her hands gripping the railing, eyes fixed on the shadows moving closer across the prairie. 3 men rode up, their silhouettes cut sharp against the pale rise of the moon. Dust clung to their coats, and the way they sat their saddles told Cole they weren't strangers to hard travel. The lead rider, tall with a thin mustache and eyes hard as glass, reined in just short of the fence. The horses snorted, stamping the dry earth. "Evening, Cole," the man drawled. His voice carried the confidence of someone used to being listened to. Cole's grip on the lantern tightened. "Evening, Silas." Thea's breath caught faintly. She didn't know the man, but she could feel the weight in Cole's tone. Silas Granger, a rancher whose land stretched wide and whose cattle grazed fat. Where Cole's fences sagged, Silas's stood tall. Where Cole's herd was thinning, Silas's multiplied. And Silas liked it that way. He liked men like Cole kept small. "We heard what you'd done in town," Silas said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Heard you took the widow." One of the other riders chuckled, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. Cole's face stayed still. "News travels fast." "Sure does," Silas said. He leaned on his saddle horn, studying Thea now. "Folks are wondering, Cole. Wondering if you lost your mind. Plenty of women could have made you a proper wife. Why tie yourself to that?" Thea stiffened, her fingers digging into the railing. She didn't speak, but her silence was loud in the night air. Cole felt heat crawl up his neck. "That's my business." Silas tilted his head, amused. "Maybe. But when a man's business starts looking like weakness, it becomes everybody's concern. Town can't afford weak men, not with the times being what they are." The words hung heavy, darker than the night around them. Cole knew what Silas was really saying. Weak men lost land. Weak men bent when stronger hands pushed. And Silas was hinting he was just the man to do the pushing. "I'll manage my ranch," Cole said flatly. Silas smirked, tugging his reins. "See that you do. But let me tell you plain, Maureen, that woman? Folks will question every choice you make from here on. And a man whose choices are doubted, well, that man don't last long out here." He wheeled his horse, the others following. Dust rose up in their wake, glowing pale in the lantern light before drifting down. Cole stood unmoving, jaw tight, until the hoofbeats faded into silence. Behind him, Thea finally spoke. Her voice was low, but steady. "He thinks you made a mistake." Cole set the lantern down on the porch rail, his shoulders taut. "He thinks he owns this land and everybody on it." She watched him, the moonlight soft on her face. "And do you?" He turned, meeting her eyes. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he said, "No." Thea gave the faintest nod, then turned back into the cabin. That night, Cole lay awake in the barn, the lantern dim beside him. The words rattled around in his skull. Weakness. Mistake. Not fit. He had carried those judgments ever since Amish died, ever since the ranch began to sag beneath his hands. Now, with Thea here, they'd only grown louder. But as he closed his eyes, the memory of her standing firm on that porch slipped into his mind. She had not spoken a word in her own defense to Silas. She had not begged. She had stood, steady as stone, letting the man's cruelty fall where it may. And Cole wondered if maybe she had already weathered worse than Silas Granger's sneer. Days passed. Thea moved through the cabin with quiet efficiency, her work precise, her presence unshakable. She did not pry into Cole's grief, did not demand words he didn't have. She cooked, she mended, she kept the small place alive. But in town, the whispers grew. Cole heard them when he rode in for supplies. Poor fool. She'll break him before the year's out. Strange kind of wife for a man like him. One afternoon, outside the blacksmith's, a group of boys called out as he passed. "Hey Cole, how's the widow's cooking? She keeping you fed, or just eating it all herself?" The laughter stung sharper than a lash. Cole stopped his horse, staring down at them. The boys went quiet, their grins faltering under his gaze. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. He rode on, but the burn of it stayed with him all the way home. That evening, Thea set supper on the table, beans, cornbread, and fresh butter. She noticed his silence, his jaw set hard. Finally, she asked, "What did they say?" Cole looked up, meeting her eyes. Nothing worth repeating to. Her gaze lingered, as if measuring the truth in his words. Then quietly she said, "I've heard it all before." He studied her across the table. For the first time, he realized she wasn't untouched by the cruelty. She had simply built armor thick enough to bear it. But armor has its limits. The next day, as Cole worked the fence line, dust rose on the southern horizon. Not the dust of 3 riders this time, but more, 5, maybe 6. Moving steady, purposeful, toward the ranch. Cole's stomach sank. Trouble wasn't waiting for him in town anymore. It was coming to his doorstep. The dust cloud thickened until the riders broke through it, their horses lathered and restless. Thea was on the porch when she spotted them, her hands still damp from kneading dough. She froze, her apron clutched in her fists as the hoofbeats drew closer. Cole set down his hammer and wire, every nerve tight as a drawn bow. 6 men rode into the yard this time, not 3. Their faces carried the look of men who weren't here for neighborly calls. Silas Granger led them again, his mustache twitching with the hint of a grin. The others spread behind him, rifles slung low, eyes cold. Dust swirled around them, catching the last light of the dying day. "Cole," Silas called, swinging down from his saddle with the ease of a man who expected obedience. "We need a word." Cole didn't move. "Say it from where you stand." Silas's grin widened. "Fair enough." He jerked his chin toward Thea, still stiff on the porch. "This about her. Town's decided. That woman ain't fit. Not for marriage. Not for the good of this place." Thea's cheeks flushed, but she stood her ground, chin lifting slightly, though her fingers trembled against the rail. Cole's voice was low. "Town don't get to decide who I take into my home." Silas shrugged, as if it made no difference. "You think so? Look around, Cole. Men talk. Women whisper. You think your ranch can survive when every neighbor turns his back? When no one'll trade, no one'll lend a hand come branding season, no one'll ride if rustlers hit your herd." The threat wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. It lay quiet, like a rattlesnake coiled in grass. One of the riders spat into the dirt. "She's a burden. Always was." Thea's breath caught, but her eyes stayed steady on Cole. For a moment, Cole said nothing. His silence stretched long, the only sound the restless stomp of hooves and the creak of saddle leather. Then, slow, he stepped forward until the lantern glow fell across his face. "You men ride out here to tell me how to run my life." Silas's smile cooled. "We came to give you a chance to fix a mistake. Send her off, Cole. Find a woman who'll lift you up, not drag you down. You're a good hand, but this," he gestured sharply toward Thea, "this makes you weak. And weakness don't last out here." Cole's hand hovered near his sidearm. Not a threat, just a reminder. His voice came steady, iron in it now. "You don't get to tell me who's worth keeping." The yard went still. The men shifted, eyes hard, fingers twitching near their rifles. For one heartbeat, it seemed the air itself might split with violence. Then Silas chuckled. It was low, humorless. "Careful, Cole. You'll find yourself standing alone against more than 6 men one of these nights." He swung back onto his horse, the others following. Their hoofbeats pounded hard as they wheeled away, the dust swallowing them as quick as it had carried them in. The silence they left behind was worse than the threat itself. Thea turned slowly toward Cole. Her face was pale, but her voice, when it came, was steady. "They'll be back." Cole looked at her, the lantern light flickering between them. "I know." That night, he didn't sleep in the barn. He sat on the porch with his rifle across his lap, the sky wide and black above, the stars scattered cold and distant. Thea's shadow passed once behind the window, but she didn't come out. She didn't need to. She knew the weight of what hung over them. Morning came gray and heavy. Thea rose early, setting bread to bake, the smell drifting out into the cool air. Cole drank coffee in silence, watching the horizon, every gust of wind stirring unease. By midday, neighbors began to drift by. Not in groups, not openly, but one by one. Men on horseback, women with baskets, all carrying the same tight-lipped look. They asked nothing, said little. They only watched Thea, watched Cole, their eyes filled with judgment unspoken. At the well, Mrs. Doherty, a sharp-tongued widow from town, finally voiced what the others would not. "Cole, you bringing her here put the rest of us in danger. You think Silas will let this lie? You think the men who follow him will forgive being shamed in front of the town?" Cole's jaw tightened. Thea's done nothing wrong. The woman's gaze slid over Thea, then back to Cole. "Sometimes wrong ain't what you do, it's what you are." She left without another word, her skirts swishing against the dust. Thea stood near the cabin door, silent through it all. Only when the woman's figure had vanished down the trail did she speak. Her voice was quiet, but it carried a weight deeper than anger. "I told you," she said. "I've heard it all before." Cole turned toward her. "You don't deserve it." Her eyes lifted to meet his, and for the first time he saw not just steel there, but grief, deep and old. "Deserve's got nothing to do with it." The words hung between them, heavier than any threat. That night, the sound came again. Not 6 riders this time. More, many more. Hoofbeats, rolling like distant thunder, carrying on the night wind. Cole stepped out into the yard, rifle in hand. The horizon glowed faintly with lantern light and the flicker of torches. They weren't waiting for morning. Silas was coming tonight. The glow on the horizon thickened into firelight, a jagged smear of orange against the dark plains. Cole stood in the yard, rifle loose in his grip, but his shoulders taut, every nerve alive with the sound of hoofbeats rolling nearer. He didn't need to count them. Too many. Far more than 6 this time. Behind him, the cabin door creaked. Thea stepped out, shawl wrapped tight against her shoulders, her face pale in the torchlight that licked over the land. She didn't ask. She didn't need to. The rumble of riders carried its own answer. Cole glanced back at her. "Stay inside." She didn't move. The first riders came into view, 24 at least, torches burning high, their horses restless beneath them. Silas Granger was at the front, his grin cut wide by firelight, cruel and sure. The others fanned out behind him, forming a loose half-circle in the yard. Men Cole knew, neighbors ranchers, boys he'd once shared whiskey with at the saloon. Their faces were grim now, some hardened, others uneasy, but all carrying the same weight of decision. Silas raised his torch. "Cole." His voice rolled heavy in the night air. "We warned you. We gave you a chance to do right. But you'd rather shame us all with your choice." Cole lifted the rifle slowly, barrel angled down, but ready. "You don't own me, and you don't own her." A murmur ran through the men. Some shifted in their saddles, uneasy. Others spat into the dirt, eager for violence. Silas leaned forward on his saddle horn, torchlight painting his face in devilish strokes. "This ain't about ownership. This is about what survives out here. Weakness don't. And that woman," he pointed the torch toward Thea, who stood unmoving on the porch. "She's a weight no man should carry. Not out here, not in this life." Thea's breath shook, but she didn't step back. She met his gaze, her chin lifting despite the tremor in her hands. Cole spoke, his voice a low rumble. "Funny thing, Silas. I don't see weakness standing here beside me. I see the only soul in this valley with the grit to keep living when every hand turned against her." For a moment, silence held. Only the crackle of torches and the snort of restless horses broke the stillness. Then Silas barked a laugh, sharp and cruel. "Fine words, Cole. But words don't keep a ranch fed. Words don't stop a bullet. And words won't stop us tonight. He raised his hand, and rifles lifted across the circle. Thea's breath caught, her fingers clutching the porch rail until her knuckles went white. Cole stepped forward, placing himself squarely between her and the gun barrels. "Think careful," Cole said, his voice carrying across the yard. "Every man here knows what it means to spill blood that ain't earned. You pull that trigger, you'll be carrying it the rest of your days." A ripple of unease moved through the riders. Some glanced at each other. Others tightened their grips. And then, from the shadows near the back of the circle, a voice broke. Not Silas's. Younger. Quieter. "She cooked for us," the voice said. All eyes turned. It was Thomas Hale, barely more than 20, a boy whose father's land butted Cole's fence line. His face was pale, his rifle trembling in his hands. "After my ma died, she brought food. I remember." The words hung heavy. Silas's grin faltered, but only for a breath. He snarled, torch sweeping wide. "She's nothing but a burden. A reminder of weakness. Don't let a boy's memory turn you soft." Another voice rose, this one older, cracked. Jedediah Clark, who'd buried 2 wives himself, looked down at Thea with eyes shadowed in torchlight. "She prayed over my Martha when no one else came. Prayed till the end." The circle stirred. Horses shifted. A few rifles lowered. Silas saw it slipping and drove his voice harder. "She'll drag us all down. Every man here knows it. Tonight we end it, or tomorrow we all pay." Cole's voice cut sharp against him, firm and final. "No, you end it tonight, and tomorrow you'll see who you really are. Kill an unarmed woman, and you'll be no better than thieves and butchers. That's what you'll carry. That's the weight you'll never lay down." For a long moment no one moved. The torches spat and cracked. Thea's breath trembled in the stillness. Cole's rifle stayed steady at his side, his eyes locked on Silas. Then Thomas lowered his gun. The sound of it dropping to his saddle echoed louder than a shot. Jedediah followed. Then another and another. The circle began to break. Men turned their horses, uneasy, avoiding Silas's glare. The firelight caught the conflict on their faces, men torn between loyalty and conscience. Silas's fury burned through his grin, twisting it into something darker. "Cowards, every one of you." He hurled his torch into the dirt, sparks flying. His horse reared, stamping. "Fine, let her rot here. But don't come crying when you starve for the weight she drags behind you." With a hard pull on the reins, Silas wheeled his horse and thundered into the dark. A few followed. Most did not. The yard fell into silence once more, the smell of smoke hanging heavy in the cooling air. Cole lowered his rifle. His chest rose and fell, slow and heavy. Thea stood on the porch, her eyes shining with something caught between sorrow and relief. She whispered, so soft it barely carried, "You should have let me go." Cole looked at her, his voice steady but quiet. "No, you're the reason I stayed." For the first time in years, her face broke, not into grief, but into the smallest, trembling trace of a smile. And somewhere out in the night, the sound of retreating hoofbeats faded, leaving only the hush of crickets and the whisper of the prairie wind.